Imagine for a second your city right now. Okay, now picture this one. Out of every 4 people you see, every 4 is just on the edge of starvation.
Yeah.
That's the reality in Gaza right now. And it's been, what, like over 100 days since those Hamas attacks on Israel?
Yeah, over 100 days.
2.2 million people, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Stuck in this humanitarian nightmare.
And it gets worse every single day. And, the UN Secretary General, he had some really strong words in his address to the Security Council recently, called it a straight-up catastrophe, and warned that, we're looking at a full-blown generational crisis here.
And he's not even just talking about the immediate horror, which is, almost impossible to grasp on its own right. Over 25,000 people dead.
In Gaza. It's unimaginable.
Most of them women and children. It's just, staggering, really.
Yeah, and that's what he's talking about, the long-term impact of all of this, How do you even begin to rebuild a society when you've got, only 16 out of 36 hospitals even partially functioning?
Yeah, 16.
Think about the children, too, a whole generation who have only ever known war and just complete deprivation their entire lives.
It's terrifying. That's what I find so... I don't know, just the sheer scale of it is it's awful. They're using this phrase, catastrophic levels of food insecurity. Which is like, what does that even mean? But what it really means is families struggling to even find their next meal,
Absolutely.
Do you imagine that desperation?
He was very clear about this. This isn't just some, consequence of war. This is a tactic. He used the term collective punishment, and he did not shy away from it at all. Every single person, he argued, deserves basic dignity and basic rights, and that's regardless of the political reality.
It's easy to get lost in the numbers, but, every single one is a life, a story. And it's not just about the physical needs either, right? It's the psychological trauma of all of this. I don't even know.
It's huge, and it's something that's it'll linger long after, the bombs stop falling. We're talking about an entire generation growing up with the scars of this conflict, PTSD, anxiety, this constant, fear of violence. It's a recipe for a very, very troubled future.
It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all of this, and to think, what can anybody even do? But the most urgent need right now is aid, right?
Yeah.
The UN and all these different organizations are working nonstop to try to get, food, water, medical supplies into Gaza. It's almost, insurmountable given what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's an incredible effort, definitely. And it's not without its own, costs. I don't know if you had seen this, but something like 153 UN workers have been killed since this thing started.
Wow.
These are people who are literally there to help, to deliver aid, and in the most dangerous possible situations.
It's just a stark reminder of how dangerous it is, for people on the ground there.
Yeah.
But even with everybody trying their hardest, is it enough? The Secretary General seemed, almost exasperated in that speech.
Yeah.
Talking about all these roadblocks to getting aid to where it has to go.
Yeah, he was very direct about it. He called out the bureaucratic hurdles, and he talked about essential items being, rejected. He says, unjustified reasons.
Yeah.
Imagine that. You're trying to get life-saving supplies to people who desperately need them, and you're hitting a wall. Paperwork, denials. It's no wonder that he's saying, look, we need more border crossings open. We got to get this stuff in there.
It really makes you realize how, even with the best of intentions, the logistics of it are just mind-bogglingly difficult. And aid, as important as it is right now, it's really a Band-Aid, isn't it? It's not a long-term solution here.
It's not, no. And, the Secretary General, he's really pushing for a more comprehensive approach here. He's saying, look, Gaza needs more than just, shipments of food and medicine. It needs a functioning economy, for one. Open trade routes, so people can actually rebuild. People need to be able to move freely to work, to just have some semblance of a normal life. And right now that feels, impossible.
Yeah, and it's not just Gaza, is it? This conflict, this crisis, it's sending these ripples out through the entire region. What happens in Gaza doesn't stay in Gaza.
No, it really doesn't. And that's where it gets even more complicated, because the Secretary General, he's deeply worried about what he calls a ripple effect.
He's talking about, tensions in the West Bank, which have been, really bubbling up lately. And then you've got the economic crisis, right, that the Palestinian Authority is dealing with, which, that obviously impacts their ability to help people. It's like this domino effect, isn't it? One thing just making everything else worse.
It is, yeah. And then you can't forget about, the broader picture in the Middle East. I mean, this conflict, it just makes everything more tense. It makes it harder to even, I don't know, even find somewhere to begin, trying to find any kind of common ground. The Secretary General, I think, seemed especially concerned about, the risk of just, I don't know, miscalculation, this escalating into something even bigger, even more difficult to get a handle on.
And he was really clear in this speech about, the two-state solution can't just be like dismissed. He actually called it, essential, not even just for, for that region, but for global security, which is it's a big statement. What do you think he means by that?
Well, I think it's about recognizing that this conflict, it impacts everyone. When people are hopeless, when they don't see a way out, a way to, I don't know, have peace, even just basic dignity, it creates an environment where extremism can flourish. And that's not something that, respects borders or anything like that. So he's saying, look, instability anywhere can lead to instability everywhere. We're all more connected than we sometimes realize.
Yeah. And I mean, the two-state solution, I mean, in theory anyway, it's like it offers some kind of path out of this cycle of violence. You know what I mean? It gives both sides at least a chance to build something, build a future where they're not, I don't know, constantly living in fear. But I mean, realistically, after all this time, can that even happen?
It's the big question, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. The Secretary General, he called for what he called a clear political roadmap to, I don't know, to address, not just the immediate situation in Laro, but everything that led to this, all these long simmering tensions,
Right. Which is, I mean, easier said than done, right? We've seen peace talks just fall apart so many times.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine, I don't know, even where they would begin to rebuild that trust.
It'll take incredible effort and political will from everyone, and it'll take dialogue, it'll take compromise, but most importantly, I think it takes recognizing that the alternative, the idea of another generation stuck in this cycle of violence, that's unacceptable.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? I mean, the Secretary General, he ended the speech with a plea for a humanitarian ceasefire, at least a chance to try to alleviate some of this suffering in Gaza. It just feels so, I don't know, small.
Yeah.
In the face of such a huge need.
Yeah, but it's a start, right? It's a pause. It's what's necessary to even allow that aid to get to the people who need it most. But it can't be the end. And he left us with a really, really important question, I think. He said, is a one-state solution where one side is denied basic rights and freedoms, is that really viable? And that's something we should all be thinking about, because how we answer that has huge implications for everybody, not just Israelis, not just Palestinians, everyone.
It's a lot to think about, but it's important. And it just drives home how important it is to, I don't know, to pay attention, to engage with this issue, to demand better, from our leaders, because the alternative, as we've seen, is just awful.